Hi. Hi. I think I got the assignment wrong. Um, so I'm here because I don't know Jeremiah at all, and when offered the opportunity to come and engage with him and with you guys, I realized that it really meant something to me to be able to have that opportunity. So I really just wanted to come and talk a little bit about kind of, while not knowing Jeremiah on a personal level, still feeling like I know him by virtue of being surrounded by what he's left behind, if that makes any sense. And so I wrote something, and I'm terrible at like improving, so I'm not going to improv, but I'll read and then we can talk and we'll figure it out. If I go down, I'm taking all of you with me. So, but I remember that one of my cooks that I used to have at Farmstead told me that simple food was, and I use that in quotations, simple food was a way for cooks to disguise their laziness or their sloppiness. And I think that applied to kind of the whole genre of rustic food. And I remember kind of, it stuck with me. I've thought about it a lot over the years because by design, my food has always been not, I wouldn't say rustic, but certainly ingredient driven. My goal is always to find the best ingredients that I can, entrust in them, take care of them, and let them speak for themselves, and not try to mask it too much. And I think a lot of that came from when I was able to go out to California, which I'll talk about in a second. But I think it's kind of all in the vernacular. I think that for me, simple food is really reflective of kind of a humble origin, of making do with what is at hand, cooking in the moment, cooking emotionally. And, you know, of course there are exceptions to every rule. I think it would be foolish to say that there aren't cooks and chefs out there attempting to create simplified food or traditionally rustic food that is messy and sloppy, and that they are trying to cover something up. But I think it goes for every style of cuisine. But at its core, for me, simple food evokes a certain connection, a familiarity, and showcases an awareness, kind of an awareness of oneself and where you are, and what you're trying to, the relationship that you're trying to have with the person across the table. And so, for me, I always try to bring myself back to trying to slide into some of the mindset of what was happening in this country in Jeremiah's time with the people who were pioneering cuisine, because I think that it's a great starting point to draw from when you're working to create menus and think about inspiration. But it's not easy. Simple is not easy to do. In fact, I think it's probably harder than a lot of other styles of food. Just because you can make a tomato tart doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing it right or well. And I think the biggest question is, are you able to do it consistently? And I think, as we all know, consistency is the name of the game, and I'd be probably hard-pressed to find another virtue in the kitchen that's more important for me. The cuisine that came out of California in the 70s took the best ingredients, treated them properly, cooked them simply. But it was a monstrous task, and I think continues to be today when attempting to do it right. I think in order to free oneself to focus only on the ingredient is a real feat, right? You really have to be in a pretty incredible state of mind. You have to give yourself time. You have to give yourself and your staff space, room to think. And that can be challenging in the environment of a professional kitchen. In our restaurant, every vegetable that comes in the back door, we start, as a lot of people do, with finding the best producers that we know and trust and form relationships with. They come in the back door, and they're all beautifully cared for, and our goal is to then perpetuate that. So washing our veg and our greens, drying them with hands, storing them with soft layers of paper towel between them, making sure that they're not compressed on their own weight, all of these things. And when we have people come in that visit us, stages or cooks that are coming to check in and say hi and maybe do a couple days of work, they're astonished at like the way the walk-in's organized and why is this so put together the way that it is. And I think that that is the biggest challenge for us, is to always maintain the focus on the ingredient and how we treat the ingredients. I moved to California in the summer of 1999, right before Stars closed, because Stars closed in the winter, right, of 99. So I was able to get in and experience, so as a cook growing up in Boston, we live in New England, we suffer the fates of not really having a growing season. We have a very short one. So when it comes, we get excited. Spring comes, it's like this torrid love affair. You're like passionate for the first snap peas and asparagus, and it carries you through the summer, and then everybody's dreading when the snow is going to fall, because you know that you're locked into a number of months with nothing, or root vegetables maybe. And so as a cook growing up in New England and working in Boston, I kept hearing about what was happening on the West Coast. And obviously now this is 99 is 20 years after Jeremiah had left. But it was still going on, obviously, and the conversation was, I think, really just starting to take over New England at that point, about how significant those relationships are, from restaurant and chef to purveyor. And kind of we were seeing the second resurgence of that movement come through New England. So I kept hearing about California, California, California. So I said, I have to go. I needed to just experience what was happening there. So I moved to California. I packed up my disgusting, rusty Toyota pickup truck with everything that I owned, which is amazing. You think this day and age that everything that I owned fit in one truck. It was incredible. A guitar, a sleeping bag, 3 knives, and a CB radio. My handle was Little Blue Truck, in case anybody cares. And I took 90 across the country. That was the first time I drove out west, solo. And it was pretty much the seminal moment of my life. I was young. I was seeing things I'd never been exposed to before. I got robbed in Detroit after doing a 10-hour day on the road. A buffalo walked across me in Wyoming when I drove through Yellowstone. I was able to witness a meteor shower all to myself while camping in the northern Oregon coast. And those things change you. But I think as young, passionate cooks do, the closer that I got to California, all I could think about was the food. Having never been there before and hearing stories, or maybe even just names of places. I would hear Fisherman's Wharf mentioned, and I'm going, oh, cool. There's a wharf I can go down to. I can buy fish from the fishermen and put it in my truck and drive back to the restaurant. And that's amazing. Little did I know that it was a tourist trap. I heard that there were restaurants that were growing all of their own vegetables, in a garden in the back. Not exactly so. But it's funny how your mind kind of creates what you want to believe. But there was one piece of the culinary fable that echoed true in my head, and I didn't realize it would actually be true, and that was kind of the mysticism and the folklore of what was being called California cuisine, and the laser-sharp focus that those who had essentially invented California cuisine had on putting the ingredients first. And I think that wasn't something that we experienced in New England just because the ingredients weren't available, right? The quality of ingredient, the length of growing season. So that concept of always trying to put the ingredient first wasn't necessarily in the forefront of every chef's mind in New England, I don't think, at that time. It was, obviously there's exceptions to the rule, you know, Jody Adams, Sam Hayward. There are certainly people who were doing these practices, but it wasn't the norm. The relationships that developed in certain restaurants between chef and farmer out there while I was there, deliveries in the back door of what was growing that week, mushroom foragers coming and presenting, chanterelles and morels like they were stolen jewels or like some dank crop of weed that just got pulled off the hillside. Like, I'd never experienced anything like this. Whole pigs, whole animals, lambs, lying on the kitchen table, pink and sweet smelling, and like waiting for their date with the butcher. Like, my mind was blown. I hadn't seen this ever before. I mean, even the glimmer of the idea that chefs could work with a grower to come up with what they wanted to have grown for the next season, for me, was something that I had never even thought about. And so I think it heralded for me kind of a new appreciation for food, and something that I desperately wanted to continue to find a way to carry with me. So kind of from that point forward, I made it my goal, knowing that I'd one day return home to the East Coast, to find a way to adopt a lot of those California principles and apply them to my native home of New England. And I'm aware, obviously, that my time in California was 20 years after Jeremiah had left the West Coast and kind of denounced California in itself, in a way, at that point. But there was no denying that the indelible imprint that he had left on cuisine was continuing to flourish and was kind of paving the way for the revolution that was happening in the country, and it set the tone for so many thousands of other cooks who, were going through those kitchens and moving their way out and going to other states and kind of just spreading the gospel. But the more I continued to chase the ideals of what it meant to me to do justice to the ingredients, I found I was really challenged. Arriving home and finding access to the quality of the ingredients I had experienced out west was very hard for me. I was ready to open my own specialty shop and eventually restaurant. And so I made it my goal from that point forward that when I knew I was going to do that, I was still in California, and I'd made the decision that if I moved home, I was going to do my own thing. And I wanted to try and carry some of this to my first restaurant project. So I made it my goal, before I even moved back, to start getting in touch with producers, contacting farmers, artisans, cheesemakers, anybody that I could. I'm a huge notebook freak. I've got a lot of notebooks and pads and things like that. And I remember I had these 3 yellow legal pads that I just was filling up. I get home from work, I'd make lists of people I wanted to call. I'd hear about this random cheesemaker in the corner of Vermont and only making so much cheese. I was just couldn't stop gathering information. And so that was all kind of the inspiration behind my first venture, Farmstead. And I think that it was really fueled by what I experienced out there and wanting to be able to bring a piece of that back to a region that really didn't have any of those opportunities, and helping to kind of push the industry and show producers how valuable they are and So Farmstead evolved, and as projects should, we continually found ourselves discovering new ways to make ingredients sing, and allowing the food to have a voice, which I know sounds like really contrived, but I think it's certainly something that we strive to do with the food. But it's hard. It's very hard. It's hard initially because we had to, gently educate our consumer and our customers and our guests about what we were serving. And we were in an area which at that time really, this was, I wouldn't say a new concept, but it was an unusual idea. And so I spent a lot of time talking to my guests about why our steaks were more expensive, about why I was selling cheese in my retail shop for $30 a pound. Also other things like why our menu would change as frequently as it did, why people could come in and get a pasta with peas in spring and they couldn't get it in November. And we had to explain ourselves out of a lot of those situations. Gladly, but with difficulty. We also had to teach our cooks how to think seasonally. And I think it's different for people in New England than it is on the West Coast. Cooks who come up in New England kitchens don't necessarily always have that ability or that mentality or the foresight to be able to cook seasonally and think about how to project out the coming season and how to start thinking about a design for tackling those new items that are going to be coming in the door. And that was a challenge. That was definitely hard for us. In order to continue working with the producers that we loved, we also had to advocate on their behalf. And that was something else that was very hard. We had to push local and state legislature on a number of issues, including a local farm bill, which we helped get passed. And I think that's something that we really loved being involved with, is trying to advocate for our producers whenever possible. And those things are hard. They're not easy, but they're worth it. And so we made sure that we fought the battles as best we could. Over the course of 11 years, our relationships with producers and guests deepened, and we learned how to get better at our jobs, and to help the community understand, both locally and regionally, what the significance was of the ingredients and why they mattered. All the time and while focusing on the back end of growing the business, which is never easy. Mark was talking about some incredible things and changing the way that they do business, and certainly all things that I aspire to, and I'm sure a lot of us in this room will aspire to be able to bring to our places. But for me also, we do have to pay the bills, right? So there's that element of business that is challenging as well, especially in that kind of post-2008 economy, especially in a state that was fairly depressed to begin with. We had a lot of challenges ahead of us, trying to create and serve the type of food that we did in that environment was hard. There's a protocol for everything that happens in my kitchen when ingredients arrive at the door and how they're stored, but there also needed to be a protocol for having each plate leave the swinging doors in the dining room looking, smelling, tasting as good as the last one did. And so, again, I think consistency is, I refer to it as the incurable itch. It's something that you feel like you need to scratch all the time. There's never, in my mind, any reason why we can't try to pursue even better consistency the next day. It can really only take place when you're working with those who you trust and those who you know share your vision. And getting people to feel and understand your vision is really fun, but also really, really hard. As we all know, working directly with the young staff, in my case, frequently made up of culinary students, is what happened in a town where one of the best culinary schools in the country is located, Johnson, Wales. Is hard. Training is paramount, takes a lot of time. My sous chefs and I spend many hours a week training staff, implementing strategies for their long-term success, and kind of really empowering them to make the job their own, to take ownership over some portion of the restaurant, I think is really important for them. In fact, we just began a new program that we started at Farmstead. We're going to continue at my new restaurant, called the Crusader program, which is for our cooks who are interested in kind of having those relationships with our growers, which a lot of them are. And maybe I have a different type of cook that seeks us out, I don't know, but when our folks come to the back door with their stuff, my guys just go crazy. And they're like kids in a candy store. What does Steve have today? Let's go see what Steve has. Oh, Steve brought, lemon basil. Steve brought this and that. And so it just turns into, they're rock stars. They're the rock stars, the growers. And so my cooks want to connect with that. And so I thought, what better way for us to get them to take some ownership over it than to connect them directly with the grower. So what we're doing is the cooks will choose a grower that they want to work with, and they'll develop a relationship. They'll get the grow list emailed to them every week. They'll come to me and my sous chefs to say, here's what they have this week. I think this looks cool. I think that looks nice. Ultimately, we make the final decisions, but then the cook will bring that order back to the grower and place the order directly. So it just gives them a little bit of a connection, I think, beyond, going into the walk-in and grabbing a bunch of chives. And so I think that's something that we want to continue to do. They also work on seed lists, with our growers. So they'll sit down in February or March with their kind of the grower that they've established this Crusader relationship with, and they'll sit down. I will have given them a list in the beginning of things that we'll be looking for the next season, and they'll talk to the grower about what those items are. And so all of these things are aspects of the job that are really fun but very challenging and very hard. So I would say that simple isn't easy. I think simple is really hard. I look now at a potato, and I just think about the implications that one potato has, and how it needs to get cared for and washed and cut properly and cooked properly and stored properly. And it's, the amount of hands that are going to touch it, or the different ideas that we have for it. And it just I have to stop because my mind will explode. And I think that is kind of the crux, the passion, and also the responsibility that we have as cooks, and especially as cooks who are teaching the next generation of cook, is to best figure out how to best balance all of those emotions and all of those things. So it's all very hard, but it's very worth it. So ultimately, I think considering that I've built my life and my reputation on how I view ingredients and how I like to treat them, and ultimately showcase them, I think I'd really like to thank Jeremiah for making my life exciting, rewarding, and really fucking hard. So thank you. I don't know if anybody has anything. Yes?
Do you grow your own microgreens?
We do, yes, actually. We don't use a lot of... What's that?
It's the simplest thing in the world.
It is very simple. We don't use a lot of them, but we do trays when we need them. So, thank you, guys.